It began as a quiet exchange deep within the private chambers of Buckingham Palace, an exchange so guarded that even senior aides were asked to leave. But when Catherine emerged, composed yet unmistakably shaken, the silence spoke louder than any official statement. Something irreversible had been decided. And at its center was a legacy tied not just to jewels but to Diana herself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded behind those sealed doors was not a routine consultation, nor a ceremonial briefing wrapped in polite tradition. It was, according to whispers circulating through palace corridors, a meeting that had been building for months, perhaps even years, quietly shaped by shifting loyalties, fragile health, and a growing urgency surrounding the future of the crown. Reports suggest that King Charles, increasingly aware of time and legacy, had summoned Catherine not simply as the Princess of Wales, but as something closer to a custodian of a story left unfinished. The presence of senior royal advisors, figures rarely gathered unless the matter carried constitutional or deeply personal weight, only intensified the gravity of what was unfolding. And then, almost without warning, the name that had lingered unspoken for so long was brought back into the center of discussion: Diana. Not as memory, not as myth, but as legacy in its most tangible form. The resurfacing of her private tiara collection, long shielded from public discourse and quietly preserved under layers of royal discretion, marked a turning point that few had anticipated. These were not merely jewels locked away for safekeeping. They were symbols, fragments of a narrative that had never truly been resolved. Insiders whisper that their reappearance was no coincidence, but part of a broader reassessment of what and who would define the monarchy in the years ahead. What made the moment even more unsettling was the level of silence imposed around it. Palace aides, accustomed to secrecy, reportedly described this as something different, stricter, colder, almost surgical in its execution. Conversations were halted mid-sentence. Movements were restricted. Even those within close proximity to the royal household were left piecing together fragments, trying to understand why such extraordinary measures were being taken. It was as though the institution itself was holding its breath, aware that whatever decision emerged would carry consequences far beyond the walls of the palace. When Catherine was seen leaving the meeting, the weight of it all seemed etched into her demeanor. She carried documents official, unmistakable, and while her composure remained intact, there was an emotional undercurrent that could not be ignored. This was not the quiet confidence of routine duty. This was something heavier, something that demanded resolve. And perhaps most telling of all was the absence that lingered around the entire event. Camilla, a central figure in the modern monarchy, was nowhere to be seen, her exclusion raising questions that no one within the palace was willing to answer openly. Those familiar with the intricate balance of royal power began to connect the dots, cautiously at first, then with growing certainty. A restructuring of legacy assets, some called it. Others described it as a recalibration of influence, a deliberate move to secure certain elements of the monarchy's identity before they could be contested or diluted. But beneath all the careful language and measured speculation, one truth remained: impossible to ignore. The past was no longer being preserved quietly. It was being repositioned. And Catherine, whether by design or by destiny, had been placed at the center of it. But what seemed like a quiet decision behind palace doors was about to erupt into a moment that would redefine power within the monarchy. For decades, Diana's tiaras were more than ornaments. They were silent witnesses to a legacy both cherished and contested. Locked away after her passing, they became symbols of a story unfinished. And now, without warning, they had been brought back into the center of royal power. They were never just jewels. That is the first truth insiders quietly repeat when the subject arises in hushed conversations. These pieces, crafted with precision, worn in moments of triumph, and burdened with unspoken history, carried something far heavier than diamonds and silver. They carried memory. They carried expectation. And above all, They carried the lingering presence of Diana herself, a figure whose influence, even in absence, has refused to fade into silence. Reports suggest that from the moment they were removed from public view after her passing, the tiaras were treated not as assets to be distributed, but as something closer to a sacred inheritance, untouchable, unresolved, and deliberately withheld from the shifting tides of royal politics. But the monarchy is not built on stillness. It evolves, often quietly, sometimes painfully, and within that evolution, objects like these begin to take on new meanings. The jewels became more than relics, they became a question waiting for an answer. Who would carry them forward? Who would be trusted not just to wear them, but to embody what they represented? For years, there was no clear response. Some believed they would remain locked away indefinitely, preserved as a tribute to a chapter too complex to revisit. Others, according to whispers from those familiar with palace thinking, suggested they were being held in reserve for a moment when the monarchy would need to reconnect with something deeper, something more emotionally resonant than protocol alone could offer. At the center of this quiet preservation stood the steady influence of Queen Elizabeth II. Though she rarely addressed such matters publicly, various interpretations of her final years suggest that she viewed Diana's legacy with a level of care that extended far beyond sentiment. To her, these tiaras were not simply personal belongings to be passed along through convenience or proximity. They were part of what some insiders have described as a sacred trust, a responsibility to ensure that the story they represented would not be diluted or misinterpreted. In that sense, their silence was intentional. Their absence from public life was not neglect, it was protection. Yet time has a way of forcing decisions that once felt distant. As the monarchy entered a new era, shaped by uncertainty and shifting public expectations, the question of Diana's legacy could no longer remain unanswered. And gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, attention began to turn toward Catherine. Not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Those familiar with the inner workings of royal tradition have long noted the parallels: her measured approach, her respect for protocol, her ability to balance duty with an emotional connection to the public. It is now whispered in the highest echelons that she was always seen as the natural successor to carry forward this particular thread of royal identity, even if the timing of that transition remained uncertain. What makes this moment so powerful is not just the reappearance of the jewels, but the shift in what they now represent. They are no longer frozen in the past. They are being reintroduced into a narrative that is still unfolding, one that demands clarity, stability, and a renewed sense of purpose. And in that narrative, Catherine's role becomes impossible to ignore. She is no longer simply aligned with Diana's legacy, she is being positioned to define it for a new generation, to give it form in a time when the monarchy itself is searching for direction. But this wasn't just about honoring the past, it was about who would control its meaning moving forward. When the decision was finally set in motion, it didn't come with ceremony, it came with finality. King Charles had made his move. And in doing so, he altered the balance of influence within the royal family in a way few had anticipated. There was no grand announcement, no carefully staged reveal to soften the impact. Instead, the shift unfolded through documents, through signatures, through the quiet but unmistakable language of authority. Reports suggest that the transfer of Diana's tiara collection to Catherine was executed through a tightly controlled legal framework, one rooted in long-standing royal protocols, yet accelerated by a sense of urgency that insiders could no longer ignore. This was not simply a gesture of sentiment. It was a decisive act of positioning, one that signaled where the crown's emotional and symbolic power would reside in the years ahead. And those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy began to recognize the weight of what had just occurred. Because within royal tradition, nothing of this magnitude happens in isolation. Every movement is calculated, every transfer layered with meaning. The mechanisms behind this decision, whether through trust structures, private custodial agreements, or the quiet invocation of institutional precedent, pointed to something far more deliberate than a personal choice. Various interpretations of palace activity suggest that this had been prepared in advance, waiting for the moment when it could be enacted with maximum clarity and minimal resistance. And that moment, it seems, arrived under the shadow of something deeply personal: King Charles's ongoing health struggles. It is here that the narrative takes on a sharper edge, because timing, in matters of legacy, is never accidental. As whispers about the king's conditions circulated with increasing intensity, so too did speculation about the future of the monarchy. Insiders claim that this decision was shaped not only by tradition, but by an awareness of vulnerability, a recognition that certain questions could no longer be postponed. Who would carry forward the emotional heart of the institution? Who would hold the symbols that connect past to present in a way the public can understand? By placing Diana's tiaras in Catherine's care, Charles was answering those questions in a way that left little room for interpretation. And the response was immediate. Across royal households, the ripple effect was impossible to contain. Conversations shifted, priorities realigned. What had once been an abstract discussion about legacy suddenly became real, tangible, and perhaps most importantly visible. Palace insiders described the move as decisive and symbolic, a rare combination that underscored both its emotional resonance and its strategic intent. It was not just about honoring Diana. It was about consolidating a narrative, ensuring that the monarchy's most powerful symbols were aligned with the figure seen as its future. But beneath the surface, another layer of meaning began to emerge. Because decisions like this do not simply elevate one figure, they inevitably redefine the position of others. As whispers grew louder, a pattern started to take shape. This was not an isolated act. It was part of a broader consolidation of legacy, a careful restructuring of influence designed to secure the monarchy's direction at a time of uncertainty. The jewels, in this sense, were only the beginning, a visible sign of deeper changes unfolding behind closed doors. And within those changes lay a tension that could not be ignored, because while Catherine's role was being strengthened, another presence within the royal hierarchy was being quietly, but unmistakably, repositioned. A presence that had long operated at the center of influence, now finding itself on the periphery of a decision it could not control. And as the full implications of this shift began to surface, it became clear that the true impact of Charles's move was only just beginning to reveal itself. But while the decision elevated Catherine, it simultaneously cast a long shadow over someone else entirely. For Camilla, the news didn't arrive gradually, it landed all at once, leaving no room for quiet adjustment. What had long been assumed as shared influence suddenly felt like exclusion, and the silence surrounding the decision only made it louder. Because in the world she had carefully navigated for decades, influence was never simply given, it was built, layer by layer, through proximity, through patience, through an understanding of how power moved behind closed doors. And for years, Camilla had existed within that movement, not always at its center, but never far from it. The symbolism of royal jewels, the quiet language of legacy, the unspoken hierarchy that determined who stood where and why, these were not abstract concepts to her. They were part of the structure she had learned to read, to anticipate, and at times to shape. Which is why this moment felt different. Not because it was unexpected in its possibility, but because of the way it unfolded: swift, contained, and without her involvement. Reports suggest that she was not consulted before the decision was finalized, a detail that has since echoed through palace conversations with a quiet but unmistakable intensity. In an institution where consultation often serves as both courtesy and control, absence from the process carries its own meaning. It signals a shift, it redraws boundaries. And in this case, it suggested that the conversation about Diana's legacy had moved into a space where Camilla's voice was no longer considered essential. That realization, according to those familiar with the internal atmosphere, did not come with confrontation or public reaction. It came with something far more difficult to navigate: silence. But silence in royal terms is never empty. It is filled with interpretation, with observation, with the careful reading of what is said, and more importantly, what is not. Within that silence, questions began to form about position, about perception, about what this decision implied not just for the present moment, but for the future shape of influence within the monarchy. Because while Camilla's role had been firmly established in recent years, this development introduced a new layer of complexity. It suggested that certain aspects of legacy, particularly those tied so closely to public emotion, were being redirected away from her sphere of association. Those within her immediate circle, including figures connected to the Parker Bowles family, are said to have felt the shift almost instantly. Not as a dramatic rupture, but as a subtle recalibration. Invitations, conversations, the tone of internal discussions, small changes that, when viewed together, began to paint a larger picture. A picture in which the balance of symbolic authority was being adjusted, not through overt action, but through carefully managed decisions that spoke for themselves. And while no official acknowledgement of tension has emerged, speculation has grown steadily, fueled by the absence of clarity and the weight of what has already been set in motion. What makes this moment particularly complex is the emotional layer beneath it. Because beyond titles and protocol, there is a human dimension that cannot be ignored. To be positioned at the center of the monarchy's present, and then to find oneself distanced from a key element of its past, creates a contrast that is difficult to reconcile. It is not simply a matter of status, it is a question of narrative, of where one fits within the story the institution chooses to tell about itself. And in this case, that story appears to be shifting in a direction that places Camilla just outside its most emotionally resonant thread. Yet even as these dynamics unfold, they do so without open conflict, without public fracture. The monarchy, as always, maintains its composure. But beneath that composure, the implications are impossible to ignore. Because this is not just about one decision or one individual, it is about the quiet redefinition of roles, the careful repositioning of influence, and the recognition that legacy once set in motion cannot easily be reclaimed. And as the palace adjusted to this new reality, another force was quietly ensuring the shift would hold. Behind the scenes, this was never meant to be a single decision, it was part of something far larger. A coordinated effort. A silent alignment of those determined to protect the monarchy's future at any cost. What appeared, on the surface, as a singular act by King Charles was, according to those familiar with the palace's deeper rhythms, the visible edge of a much broader strategy, one that had been quietly forming long before the tiaras were ever brought back into discussion. Because in an institution as enduring as the monarchy, decisions of this magnitude are rarely isolated. They are reinforced, secured, and, when necessary, shielded by those who understand that legacy is not just inherited, it must be defended. And at the center of that defense stood Prince William, not merely as the heir, but as an active force shaping the direction in which that legacy would move. Reports suggest that William's role extended far beyond quiet approval. He was, in many ways, the stabilizing presence behind the transition, ensuring that the shift was not only symbolically powerful, but structurally sound. His position within the Duchy of Cornwall, combined with a growing influence over the operational side of the monarchy, allowed him to act with a level of authority that bridged tradition and modern necessity. Those close to the process describe his involvement as deliberate, measured, and unwavering, focused not on personal sentiment, but on securing a future that aligned with the Crown's long-standing principles. And in that future, Catherine's position was not just recognized, it was fortified. But William was not acting alone. Alongside him, figures like Princess Anne brought a different kind of strength, one rooted in discipline, in an almost unyielding commitment to tradition. Known for her uncompromising approach to duty, Anne's influence is often described as quiet, but decisive, operating through what some insiders have referred to as a form of bureaucratic precision. She does not move impulsively, she enforces. And in moments like this, where the balance of legacy is at stake, her presence becomes critical. It is whispered that she played a key role in ensuring that the mechanisms surrounding the transfer were not just effective, but irreversible, anchored in precedent, reinforced by protocol, and protected from any future challenge. Because that is where the true power of this moment lies, not in the decision itself, but in the systems that now support it. Institutional mechanisms, long embedded within the monarchy's framework, were quietly activated. Trust structures were adjusted. Custodial rights clarified. Layers of approval were secured in ways that leave little room for reinterpretation. This was not a gesture that could be undone with time or persuasion. It was, by design, permanent. And that permanence sends a message, one that extends far beyond the immediate context of Diana's legacy. It signals a shift toward a more defined, more controlled approach to inheritance, where ambiguity is replaced with clarity, and where the crown's priorities are enforced with precision. At the heart of it all lies a principle that has guided the monarchy through its most challenging moments: duty over personal ties. It is a phrase often repeated, but rarely felt as strongly as it is here. Because this was not a decision made without consequence. It required difficult choices, the setting aside of relationships, and the acceptance that not every voice would be included in shaping the outcome. Yet, within the framework of the institution, those sacrifices are not seen as losses, they are seen as necessary. Necessary to preserve continuity. Necessary to maintain trust. Necessary to ensure that the crown remains something greater than the individuals who serve it. And as these forces aligned, something new began to take shape: a unified front, subtle but unmistakable, centered around protecting Catherine's role not just as a participant in the monarchy, but as one of its defining figures, the guardians of tradition, the architects of its future, and the enforcers of its rules had, in their own ways, converged on a single objective: to secure the narrative before it could be questioned. But as the dust began to settle, the deeper meaning of this moment became impossible to ignore. This was never just about tiaras. It was about identity, about who represents the future of the monarchy and who embodies the legacy it chooses to carry forward. Because beneath the weight of tradition, beyond the carefully constructed protocols and inherited titles, the monarchy has always relied on something less tangible, but far more powerful: connection. A connection to the people, to history, to a narrative that feels both timeless and deeply personal. And for years that connection has carried the unmistakable imprint of Diana, a presence that continues to shape expectations long after her absence. Now, as that legacy begins to shift into Catherine's hands, the meaning behind the decision reveals itself with greater clarity. This is not about adornment. It is about continuity. It is about ensuring that the emotional thread that once defined an era is not lost, but transformed into something that can endure. Catherine's role within this transformation has not emerged suddenly. It has been built slowly, carefully, through years of measured action and quiet consistency. Those familiar with the monarchy's internal rhythms often point to her ability to balance two seemingly opposing forces: modern relatability and unwavering respect for tradition. It is a balance that few manage to achieve, and one that has positioned her uniquely within the royal structure. Reports suggest that this is precisely why the transition of Diana's legacy carries such significance. It is not simply being handed over, it is being entrusted, placed with someone who is seen as capable of carrying its weight without distorting its meaning. Public perception, too, plays an undeniable role in this moment. The monarchy does not exist in isolation. It reflects and responds to the emotions of those who observe it. And in Catherine, many see an echo, not a replication, but a resonance. The same quiet strength, the same sense of approachability, the same ability to bridge the distance between institution and individual. It is whispered that this alignment was not overlooked when the decision was made, that in a time when the monarchy faces scrutiny and change, reconnecting with one of its most beloved narratives was not just symbolic, it was strategic. because legacy, when it resonates, becomes a form of stability. Yet what makes this transition so compelling is the contrast it reveals. The past was marked by division, by moments of uncertainty that left lasting impressions on both the institution and the public. The present, however, appears to be moving towards something different, something more unified, more intentional. By placing Diana's legacy in Catherine's care, the monarchy is not erasing what came before. It is reframing it, drawing a line that connects past struggles to present purpose. And in doing so, it creates a narrative that feels both familiar and renewed, one that suggests a path forward rather than a repetition of old tensions. Within this evolving narrative, Catherine stands at a unique intersection. She is both a continuation and a beginning, a figure who carries the weight of history while shaping what comes next. This dual role is not without its challenges. To embody a legacy as powerful as Diana's, while maintaining her own identity, requires a delicate balance, one that demands both strength and restraint. But it is precisely this balance that has defined her journey so far, and it is what now positions her as a central figure in the monarchy's future, not as a reflection of the past, but as its interpreter, someone who can carry its meaning forward without being confined by it. And yet, even as the crown found its center again, the story it carried forward was far from over. Not all consequences are announced. Some unfold in silence, in altered routines, in unspoken tensions, in doors that no longer open the same way they once did. In the immediate aftermath of the decision, the palace did what it has always done best: it carried on. Engagements continued. Statements remained carefully measured. The outward rhythm of royal life moved forward with the same composed precision that has defined it for generations. But beneath that steady surface, something had undeniably shifted. Those who observed the institution closely began to notice it first, not in grand gestures, but in the smallest of changes. Access that once felt effortless now carried hesitation. Conversations that once flowed freely seemed more guarded, more deliberate, and within those subtle adjustments, a deeper story began to take shape. Reports suggest that influence, once dispersed across a wider circle, has begun to consolidate in ways that feel both intentional and irreversible. The transfer of Diana's legacy did not simply elevate one figure, it reoriented the structure around her. Catherine's presence, already significant, now carried a new gravity, one that quietly redefined the dynamics of proximity and authority. Those who had long operated within the inner sphere found themselves navigating a landscape that no longer felt entirely familiar. Not excluded, but repositioned. Not removed, but distanced in ways that could not easily be articulated. At the same time, ceremonial roles, often seen as symbolic but deeply tied to status, began to reflect this internal recalibration. Appearances, alignments, even the order in which individuals were seen or acknowledged, seemed to shift with a subtle but unmistakable intent. It was not dramatic enough to provoke immediate reaction, yet not insignificant enough to go unnoticed. Insiders whisper that these adjustments are part of a broader effort to reinforce a new center of gravity within the monarchy, one that aligns more closely with the future being quietly constructed behind closed doors. And with that shift came a growing sense of distance between factions within the royal household. Not a conflict defined by open disagreement, but a separation shaped by evolving priorities and unspoken understanding. Those aligned with the emerging direction appeared increasingly unified, their presence reinforcing a narrative of continuity and control. Others, while still part of the institution, seemed to exist just outside that alignment, their roles becoming more defined by what they were no longer central to. It is within this quiet division that the true complexity of the moment begins to reveal itself. Beyond the palace, the outside world has responded in its own way. Media speculation has intensified, attempting to decode the subtle signals emanating from within. Analysts have pointed to patterns, to shifts in visibility, to changes in tone that suggest something more than routine evolution. Yet the monarchy itself remains unwavering in its public composure, offering no confirmation, no contradiction, only the steady continuation of its duties. This silence, as always, becomes part of the narrative, inviting interpretation while maintaining control. What makes this moment particularly significant is not just the changes themselves, but what they suggest for the future. Because once internal structures begin to realign, they rarely return to their previous form. The decisions made now quiet, calculated, and deeply symbolic will shape the monarchy's trajectory for years to come. They will influence not only who holds power, but how that power is understood, perceived, and sustained. Because what had been set in motion wasn't just a moment, it was a transformation. In the end, history rarely remembers the meetings, it remembers the decisions. And this one, quiet as it began, may come to define an entire era of the monarchy. Because what has unfolded is far more than a private transfer of heirlooms. It is the reassertion of a principle that has guided the crown through centuries of uncertainty, that legacy must always stand above personal interest. The decision to place Diana's tiaras into Catherine's care is not simply symbolic, it is foundational. It draws a clear line between what is held for the institution and what is influenced by individual proximity. And in doing so, it reaffirms a truth that the monarchy, in its most critical moments, has always returned to: the crown does not belong to any one person. It is carried, protected, and ultimately passed forward with purpose. For Catherine, this moment marks something deeper than recognition. It shapes the path she now walks, defining not just her present role, but the expectations that will follow her into the future. The weight of Diana's legacy is not easily held. It carries admiration, memory, and an emotional connection that spans generations. To receive it is to accept a responsibility that extends far beyond ceremony. It requires strength, restraint, and an understanding that every action will be measured against the echoes of the past. And yet, it is precisely this challenge that now places her at the center of the monarchy's evolving identity, no longer simply part of its story, but one of its defining voices. At the same time, the decision reveals something equally significant about King Charles. In a period marked by personal challenges and increasing pressure, his choice reflects a clarity of purpose that cannot be overlooked. Reports suggest that this was not an easy path, nor one taken without careful consideration. But within the context of legacy, ease is rarely the guiding factor. What matters is continuity. What matters is ensuring that the institution remains anchored, even as circumstances shift. By acting when he did, Charles has signaled where his priorities ultimately lie, not in preserving comfort, but in securing the monarchy's long-term stability. And that stability depends on something more than tradition alone. It depends on the ability to adapt without losing identity, to evolve without erasing the past. This is where the significance of the moment becomes undeniable. The monarchy is not standing still, it is recalibrating, aligning its most powerful symbols with a future it believes can sustain them. In Catherine, it has found a figure capable of carrying that alignment forward, someone who embodies both continuity and change in equal measure. Looking back, this decision will likely be seen not as an isolated event, but as a turning point, a moment when the direction of the monarchy became clearer, more defined, and perhaps more deliberate than it had been in years. It reflects a shift in how legacy is managed, how influence is distributed, and how the institution prepares for what lies ahead. And while the full impact may take time to unfold, its significance is already beginning to settle into place. Because in the world of crowns and legacy, the most powerful moves are the ones that echo long after the moment has passed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.